Former Deputy President David Mabuza has died. He served as Deputy President from 2018 to 2023. And for more on this, we're joined now by our political reporter, Ziyanda Ngcobo. Ziyanda, welcome back. But of course, on a more somber note this time. What do we know?
Well, at this stage, you'll remember, David, that the former deputy president has been ill for quite some time. And at some stage, even when he was still deputy president, he wasn't as visible as people would have liked him to be because of the allegations that he'd been poisoned and that at the time he was in and out of Russia seeking treatment. So at this stage, what we understand is that, you know, he succumbed to that long fight that he had with the poison. I mean, the last time we saw him was, I think, at the inauguration of President Cyril Ramaphosa last year, at around this time, actually, last year in July, but really keeping out of the public eye, but lots to be said about his role in politics, in particular in Mpumalanga, the man who is described as the cat, who survived many political battles within the ANC when he was Deputy President of Parliament, when under siege. So, you know, the Premier League that he was, the so-called Premier League that he would have been part of with the likes of Supra Mahumapelo and Ace Magashule as well. And a lot of politicians, I'd say, in Mpumalanga have been groomed by David Mabuza. In fact, part of what many say has been the reason why there was so much disarray when he left is because he played almost a father figure to all those who were there. And in fact, when he was about to leave, there was almost an anticipation that he would, you know, be the one to hand over the reins to someone, which then it became Amandla Ndlovu. But there's so many, the likes of Ngrai, even Refilo Mtweni Tsipane, all of them, Lindiwe Nchali in the Mpumalanga province, who've all sort of been groomed by David Mabuza. And of course, very sad for the ANC as someone who was also still playing a leadership role when it came to planning, for instance, the January 8th celebrations last year that were held in Mbombela.
Of course, I mean, I remember the period of the so-called, Premier League, because it was quite a powerful bloc that rose in ways that many people hadn't anticipated, and they were basically in charge. But it's amazing how then the Premier League quickly disintegrated, and as some people have said, it was because he saw it coming and realized that all he needed to do, given his age and everything that was happening around him, was to just stay inside the ANC, but without having to be involved in skirmishes of people who were ambitious and the like. In other words, he knew what to do at the right time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there'll be different interpretations of that, because you'll remember that, you know, those who were supporting in the run-up to the Nasrec one in 2017, they almost believed that Mpumalanga was in the bag because of the Premier League, but because then he came out a few days before and started talking about unity, a unity candidate. I remember being very confused. Who's this unity candidate? What does he mean? And, you know, he used to speak a lot in parables and innuendos, and it was very deliberate on his behalf, and he still became deputy president. There was still a lot of betrayal that was felt from the Zuma camp on the part of, you know, David Mabuza, because even his seeking of treatment in Russia was because of connections apparently from, you know, former President Jacob Zuma, and through that action of this unity candidate at Nasrec 1, which obviously saw, you know, the ascension of President Cyril Ramaphosa for his first term and his first electoral mandate, you know, that was basically the disintegration of that Premier League and its strength. It actually crumbled. He crumbled
what was the right thing for him to do at the right time? Yeah, because I mean, someone else could have just said, "Well, I believe in what I believe in, even though the odds would be stacked against you," and just move on, or go on, continue with your agenda. I mean, he saw the writing on the wall, as some people say at the time, and decided, you know what, let me just do the right thing. Thus far and no further. Let me count my losses, and this is it. And then I leave with my dignity intact and still committed to this movement that I've dedicated most of my life to.
Yeah, and many people, I mean, that's why I said the different interpretations. There are many others who said, actually, had it not been for David Mabuza, you know, the country would have gone on a different trajectory, that he saved the country, and he came out with, you know, sort of a heroic kind of stature. But that's why he was called the Cat, right? Because he was always moving in a very unique kind of manner. You never could quite pin what his thoughts would be. He was almost like an enigma to many, and then almost at the last minute, then coming, you know, with the card that he was going to play at the time. And, you know, with his sort of taking a huge step back from active politics, primarily because of his health and that poisoning, you know, there was also a difference, especially in a province such as Mpumalanga, where they still felt that his voice was needed. Others were more than happy to see him go. They felt that he was like a mafia. He was running everything. Nothing would happen without the stamp of approval of a David Mabuza. But it also tells you about how he managed to almost finesse, for lack of a better word, the systems within the ANC, the branches. He basically held the province in his hands quite literally for decades at that. Nothing would happen without him there. But at the same time, there's the ugly part as well. Mpumalanga has also been tainted by the very ugly legacy of political killings, almost mirroring those in a province such as KwaZulu-Natal. And sometimes he's been fingered. He would have been fingered in that. He would have also been a part of some of the scandals when it comes to farms, corruption when it comes to farms, and how farms are actually farms that are meant to be going to black people under the auspices of radical economic transformation, that not happening. So a complex legacy when talking about someone like David Mabuza, but certainly someone you can't ignore.
And the end of an era, I suppose, for a particular generation. At some point, many people thought would now have ascended to like the ultimate. If you look at where Suprama Umapilo is now in Parliament, as a chairperson of a committee, where Ace Magashule is the leader of another party that hasn't made any, you know, had any presence, and he disappeared quietly because at their peak, many people thought these were the guys, or at least one of them would be the one who would be president today, and lo and behold.
And a sort of that whole era of radical economic transformation that also sort of dissipated once Ramaphosa was appointed. You'll remember in the build-up to Nasrec 1 how there was so much talk about radical socio-economic transformation, how Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma had to deliver that the time was now. It was a policy of the ANC, and David Mabuza formed a significant part of that conversation. But, you know, it was also interesting, if you remember, to see how Mabuza also, like the cat that he was, also changing stance and adapting into the Ramaphosa administration, not really giving any problems to Ramaphosa, just, you know, sort of being there in the background, doing his duties, of course, leading the South African National AIDS Council, leader of government business, but not as visible as people would have wanted him to be until, of course, his resignation in 2023, and silently going off into the sunset. Wasn't even there. And I think there is still a lot to be said about his current feelings about the ANC, given how during the January 8th commemorations last year, he was nowhere to be found. We're told, you know, he donated a couple of bakkies, etc., but he'd actually gone to Swaziland, and his absence there was very visible, and to many, it sent a message about how he felt about the current administration of President Cyril Ramaphosa, and, you know, not being present in his backyard, quite literally, to almost endorse what was happening in the province at the time.
I mean, given the fact, or shall I say, the reality that deputy presidents hardly have like a lot of work. The president is always the star. Okay, traditionally, your South African National AIDS Council is the president's. And more often than not, except for perhaps for that era of former President Nelson Mandela, where you had the leader of government business being someone else, like Steve Tshwete, at the time. But since then, you've had deputy presidents being the leaders of government business, so they can hold things together. But in very real and practical terms, they don't really have a great deal of work. Of course, they then get to deputize when the president is not around and so on. And more often than not, it is those who have ambitions, all right, and who see themselves as being in line, who would then take up a whole lot more work than ordinarily would be the case. So given the fact that he realized perhaps early on, you know, that his fate was almost sealed, he then chose the path of, shall I say, cruising, keeping it all simple, you know, and intact, and never really ruffling feathers or doing extraordinary things that other people who still feel that they have a chance of being the ultimate leader would do.
Yeah, I mean, and it was very clear that he only wanted to serve one term. You know, at some stage it felt as if he had a gentleman's agreement with the president to say, I'm just going to be here, let me finish, almost as a thank you, because in fact, had it not been for David Mabuza turning the caucus just a day before the voting was set to take place, the outcome would have been completely different. And I think to a large extent he had been tired, because even after he'd left, we'd still get reports that, you know, he's out of the country. In fact, during his presidency, it became a subject of debate in Parliament, if my memory serves me well, about his absence. He's forever absent, never in the country, always just traveling to Russia, and even suspicions about his trips to Russia. Is it really about treatment, or is he there, you know, under different auspices as well, on behalf of the party and for himself? And so when you look at that and how he played his cards right. You know, many will remember that when it comes to David Mabuza, but also going back to his history in the province. He's somebody who's always been, you know, quite active, you know, in different portfolios. I think he was MEC for housing at some stage in the province. And he was the treasurer of FEP, Neusa, a Zanya student organization. So he's played many roles, I mean, in the organization. I'm sure the likes of Matthews Posa would also have something to say as people coming from the province of Mpumalanga. So undoubtedly, there's going to be lots to be said. I did try to put in a call to the presidency. I think they're also still just trying to make sense of the news. It is a bit of a shock because he has been out of the spotlight for some time, but certainly not expecting this news.
I'm sure a lot of people are going to have lots of things to say about him, and no doubt he will get a state funeral once, of course, the family and the state get to decide on what happened. Let's talk about people, or the people you've mentioned, I mean, who were closest to him or who were his proteges, some of them. Have they been able to, you know, rise and come through the ranks to make their presence felt in ways that perhaps he could not ultimately do?
Well, if you look at someone like Alindiwe Njali, who is now the Deputy Minister of Correctional Services, I think there are many who have had to make do for themselves under the circumstances since he'd left the province. You'll remember there was a time where there was almost a vacuum of leadership in the province after he had left, because he had sort of not wanted to make a clear pronouncement on who he believes should take over the province. You have Amandla Ndlovu there as well, who is now the premier of the province. You have Refilwe Mthweni-Tsipane, who is now leading the National Council of Provinces. But there was some fighting, and he was also criticized for that, to say, you know that everybody's looking to you for leadership. Why would you not leave a strong leadership in place that everybody sort of believes, and almost like similar to his former political ally, you know, Jacob Zuma, who almost sort of just leaves it out there into the ether, and then things must sort of sort themselves out in a way. David Mabuza had a similar kind of leadership style when it came to that.
We're talking about David Mabuza, the former president of the Republic, deputy president of the Republic of South Africa, who we have just learned has died. David Mabuza, born on the 25th of August, 1960, went on to matriculate at Kumbula High School and studied at the Mgwenya High School, College of Education and later the University of South Africa, earning himself a certificate in education and a BA, of course, at that institution. Formerly, as Ziyanda was saying, a secretary of AZASO, the Azania Student Organization, between 1984 and 1985. He went on, of course, to join the government, first the provincial government in Mpumalanga, and then later on, of course, getting on to national politics. The first one in as the Deputy President of the Republic on the 27th of February 2018, and again on the 30th of May 2019 for the 6th Democratic Administration, following his appointment to his role as President Cyril Ramaphosa's deputy. He was tasked, as you heard from Ziyanda earlier on, to be the leader of a government business in Parliament, but also to be the leader of the South African National AIDS Council, a portfolio of position often, or in fact always, that has traditionally been given to deputy presidents to look at the country's integrated response to the challenge of HIV and AIDS. Of course, from time to time, he would chair or preside over presidential task teams, ministerial committees that the president would give him responsibility for. He also had a great deal of humor. Ziyanda, he would talk about the cat,
yes,
you know, and how you shouldn't, you should be careful when dealing the cat. That coming from him with all his white smile, and would lead to a lot of people giggling or around him as he made jokes of his own self.
Oh, there's a favorite video of mine that I actually quite like. It also became quite a popular meme, you know, in the run-up, I think, to Nasrec 1, where he says, "Slimele man siyalimala." We can't after this. We've worked too hard for this. Which is basically saying that, you know, we're wounded and we're getting wounded. We can't after this allow to just let go of power in many aspects. And as you just mentioned, a group of people around him, you know, laughing about it, and just also an indication of how he knew the things people were saying about him, describing him as the cat, and almost taking it on the chin to say, I'm aware of what you got, taking it in his stride, to say, I'm aware. And actually, I have a lot of influence. I think he was very aware of the influential role that he had within the ANC. I mean, you think about the allegations of branches being manipulated ahead of conference. That's something that was an allegation that was leveled against him, because after KZN, Mpumalanga was one of the biggest provinces between Mpumalanga and the Eastern Cape that almost sort of split, and then Limpopo somewhere there. And even when you look at how going into the second NASREC now in 2022, there was lots of talk about, you know, branch audits, and I think Mpumalanga fell off. It fell quite down in terms of the top, the provinces that brought the most numbers, I should say. Mpumalanga no longer being right up there. I
suppose they no longer occupy.
Yes, and this was also something people say is because he was no longer there, because that was sort of the way that he played the game within the party. So what I'm trying to say is, I think he almost knew that he didn't necessarily want the top job, but he wanted to be influential in the organization and be able to influence the politics of the country from where he was, but not necessarily front-facing. I mean, getting an interview with David Mabuza was like trying to draw blood from a stone, because he never quite liked those interviews, just simply because he was a very private person. He kept to himself. He didn't want to always show his hand, and that's exactly who and what the cat was.
Ziyanda Ngcobo, you're not going to leave it there. We are going to be joining Xoli Mngambi, who comes next with news at Prime. We will, of course, continue with these conversations following, of course, the death of former Deputy President David Mabuza.